No more people are joining. All right, welcome everyone. So welcome to session 3 of our study group. Some of you didn't get an email from me, which means I don't actually have your email as registered for the class, or it's misspelled, so I have to check it. So if that's the case, please go ahead and post it to me now. I know of at least one person who doesn't have it, so we want to definitely get it. Make sure you get harassed by my emails. Let's see. So the question I asked just a few minutes ago, which I hope everyone can post, is how did you do with your tests? How did that go? So let me post your score if at all possible, so I can have that. Let's see, and I got quite a few of you. It's good, good. All right, so I got at least 2 people who didn't get the email. That's all right. They weren't earth-shattering emails, not yet. They were just reminders. All right, here's the video. Here's what we're doing. Do your tests, that kind of stuff. I didn't spam you as promised. So good. All right. Just a reminder that it is June 8th. Oh, and maybe here's another question before I talk about reminders. Is that did you get an email from Greg Wagner? I think he also sent out an email from WebH Solutions. He might have. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, Lydia, we're going to fix that because if I use Greg's list, so if you didn't get an email from us, we're going to make sure that you get it. So, all right. So I'm going to re-verify all the email addresses. So we're gonna reach out to those of you who are saying that you haven't gotten emails to make sure that you're on the email list. I wouldn't say you're missing gold per se, but you are missing a few things that could be very helpful. Just a few reminders here and there. So we'll take care of that. We'll fix that. Now that we know that there's a problem, we'll make sure. So apologize. Next time we'll check that first and make sure we got everyone's email address. Okay. All right. So let's talk about then what we're gonna or supposed to be focusing on this week. But before we do that, I'm gonna do the great mass unmuting so that everybody can have control of their audio destiny. So I'm gonna unmute everyone in 3, 2, 1, and then you can mute yourselves back as you see fit. So 3, 2, 1. Everyone is now unmuted. Yes. It even warns me. It's like everyone now has full audio control, should they? And yes, you do, actually. So you now have full audio control over your audio destiny. So please feel free to chime in and speak as you see fit. So, all right. That being said, all right. So, so in session 1, we met back in May, and we talked about like what we were doing, which is basically our focus is you've all taken the class. We talked about the ramp up guides, and then basically we said here is the Udemy study course. So just study the course, right? That's really just the basic thing. Take the exam practice questions, and that's really the focus. And that there were 4 tests. Then when we met for session 2, which was the last session, our focus was making sure that you knew that you wanted to focus on one test at a time, right? And then try to get a 90, 95 on that test and then move on to the next test. So you want to be like in the 90s. And the reason for that is that obviously these are not exact copies of the questions, nor do we really like want that. It feels kind of cheap to approach it that way. But that what we were doing here is we want to get a 95 because you're going to lose about 10 or 15 points. And we want some little margin of error, right? When you actually take the actual exam. John Bonzo has an eidetic memory, so he's able to really recall, like in detail, all the questions. Amazon is obviously fully aware of what he's doing because I actually asked them, right? So the questions are pretty close, but they've been rewritten. And so the goal here is you're going to focus on one test at a time, get in the 90s, take the second test, get in the 90s, and just lather, rinse, and repeat basically until you get to test 4. And then oddly enough, you will be ready for the exam. And especially since you've taken the class. And if you want extra hands-on experience, you can. That's not a huge focus for the Cloud Practitioner's exam, but there are options that we talked about at one point in time. So let me just make sure someone was checking in on something. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Good. Chris, I'm gonna do the great unmuting again because a couple of you have had some issues. So 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Everyone mute back who doesn't want to be muted. There we go. Perfect. All right. So, so that was the main goal, was to master one test at a time. We have 4 tests, get a 95%, and then you're good. Now, we also last time talked about how to approach the questions, where we actually ran through some of the questions and how to analyze them, how to look for keywords, like what are the requirements, then identifying the services that are involved, eliminate the known wrong answers, and just know that if there were duplicates that looked remarkably identical, like 2 or 4 even, because sometimes they do 4 duplicates, then you knew that that was probably going to be the right answer, unless it was like easily eliminated, and that what you needed to do was find out what the difference was. And then at the end of each question, especially if you got it wrong, which was part of the review process, to start crafting kind of your own cheat sheet, if you will, to change your thinking, where if you get something wrong because you think something about EBS, for example, or EC2 is one way, and you get it wrong because it's really the other way, to actively write down the counter for that, to write down, oh yeah, I thought EBS volumes work this way, but I got the question wrong and it actually said they work this way. To write that counter down, like you definitely want to do that. The other tool that's really useful for this, by the way, is that when you go to take the exam, I'm sorry, the practice exams, not the exam, but the practice exams. When you take the practice exam, is to star questions that you guessed on, so that you can verify whether or not your logic was correct or not. So that was the other thing, like I didn't write down, I think like that would have been like step number 6, is to, we'll just put this here, right? Is to star or mark for review questions that you are guessing on, where you don't really know the answer, but you're kind of like, I think this is the right answer, but I'm not really sure. So I'm just taking kind of a little bit of a guess to find out. So that's another tip. Now, to say this, you'll do that when you do the practice exams, but when you take the actual exam, you are not going to star the ones that you take a guess on. This is really important for you to know, to take away. Just take this in for a second. This will probably be the most important thing I say tonight until I say that statement again, which is that you don't want to go back and review ones that you've taken a guess on, because statistically your first guess is typically the right answer, statistically, right? And we've known this for decades. So you don't want to go back and question exams that you actually put an answer down for. Now you can star exams, you can mark for review questions that you didn't put an answer for. I highly recommend that, because you want to go back and answer them. But if you answered a question, you're like, you know what, I think it's this, and you put that down, don't go back and star that in the actual exam. In the practice exams, absolutely, so you can confirm your logic. But in the real exam, you're not going to go back and question things that you took a guess on, because your guess is probably going to be right. By the way, 2 people contacted me this week to let me know that they passed the exams using the methodology that we're talking about. They started, by the way, 4 months ago. So some of them, it took them a little bit longer, I think. So some of the people have passed and passed the certification. I even had one of those 2, by the way, wasn't a cloud practitioner. It was a solutions architecture student who actually passed the solutions architecture exam using the same methodology that we were using, but of course without any instructor guidance or anything like that. So let me just check and make sure I'm not missing any questions or comments. No, looking good. All right, don't see any more here. Oh, yeah, no, we're all good. All right, so then what is session 3 going to be about? Well, this one's going to be a little bit more scary, I think, for people. So what we're looking for here is that our commitment for session 3 was for you to take your own exam, like to take an exam, get, by the way, it could be a 95, it could be an 80, but it could be 41. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what you did. But we were looking for volunteers to see if someone would be a presenter and allow us to kind of review the incorrect questions and kind of verbalize and walk through the logic and how you were thinking. So I coach people one-on-one on how to take the certification exams for those who want like an extra level. And so this is like a simulation of that, right? To let people kind of like walk through the logic so that you can also learn from it. So, just to say this, before we dive into that, there's nothing new really for session 3 today, other than in the link, and I did send out an email with an easy accessible PDF, which I hope that people got, because I actually didn't do it in Google Drive. I actually copied it out somewhere else so people could get it. I'll send out another PDF tomorrow, which will have the links in it. So these links that you see here are some quick links that are super focused on the content for the cloud practitioners. And so now that you've been taking a few of the exams, if you're struggling, for example, to know how support plans work or how cost management works, there's a couple of like official AWS links here. Now, just so you know, John obviously covers that very well in his practice exams, but I also wanted to give you the official AWS links just in case. Okay, so all that talking aside, before I move on to our practice exams, does anyone have any questions, comments, needs, any logistics? Okay. Everyone's looking good this far. All right. Let's see. Okay. So, question here then is looking for a volunteer. Would someone be willing for us to look at their incorrect answers for their exam? Is there anybody who'd be willing to be a presenter and let us do that, to be in the spotlight for a moment? Anyone would like to take a shot at that? No? Because I know there's a couple people out there who took the exam, but I was wondering if any of you would be willing for us to review your exam questions. Okay, I know it can be a little tough to be in front of a bunch of people, right? All right, so I'm going to hold that open in case someone wants to volunteer. Otherwise, we're going to run through some of the logic around these questions ourselves. So if you change your mind, I know it can be a little daunting. If you change your mind, if you'd like to hop in, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to run through an exam myself and kind of highlight some of the logic. And I'm going to ask people to post their responses inside of chat, but I see some people are doing it questions. Oh, hold on. I got somebody. Oh, Greg. Okay. Greg would like to show his answers. All right. Excellent. Okay. So Greg, I'm going to make you a presenter, if that's okay. And then you can share. So let me show you exactly where I'd like you to go. So I want you to go to your whatever test you want to choose. And then I'd like for you to click on the test, and I want you to just come here and click on review questions. Make sure you blow it up full screen so it looks like this. And then let's go through the incorrect questions if that's applicable. All right, so Greg Wagner, I'm gonna make you presenter.
It's very applicable. Incorrect answers.
You know, just to say this, this guy Bobby that I was working with for the test, when he started, he got a 25, and after 3, maybe 4, I think it was actually 4 additional test things, he was at 95. Super comfortable for one of the tests in particular. All right, so I'm gonna make you the presenter, and then if you can, share your screen and let's review. You are now in control. Excellent. All right. I'm gonna move this video line up a little bit to make the test bigger. Awesome. Okay, good. All right, so here we are. It's attempt 1, test 1. And so what was your total score, just to check? Greg, did I lose you? Oh no, you're on staff now. All right, Greg, if you're talking,
Yeah,
there we go.
You muted me. So I got a 41 overall. I kind of sped through the test. And
well, how much time was it that you spent?
half an hour when it's supposed to be an hour and a half.
Yeah. No, that's good. So you did a speed run, right? So you got like through that, so you could get some incorrect answers. That's perfect.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what might be better, because in some of these cases, if I didn't know the second answer and I got 1 right out of 2, or I got none right, it's because I just didn't know. So for me to go where my logic was may not be very helpful. So maybe it might help for you just to talk through what was wrong, and is my incorrect answer even a thing, or is it like a made up AWS
Yeah,
term, and the standard
yeah,
reserved instance even exist?
yeah. Let's do it. So go ahead and switch all questions to incorrect if you don't mind.
All questions.
Yeah, switch it to incorrect. And
Okay.
we're going to assume that you didn't guess on any of the correct questions, so we'll come back around. So
Okay.
how's all right. So for example, here's question one. And so which of the EC2 instance purchasing options lets you take advantage of unused EC2 capacity in the AWS cloud and provides up to a 90% discount compared to on-demand prices? So by the way, this question already presupposes that you know that there's an on-demand type, which is what everyone uses, that there's a reserved instance type, that there's a spot type, and that the reserved instance type has actually a few different permutations. So in this case, and there, by the way, there is the dedicated host, dedicated instance type as well. So there's actually a number of types that are in play here. So all of these answers are actually legitimate because reserved instances do have a standard reserved instance and they have a convertible reserved instance. And in that link that I have posted into the Google Doc, the one about the AWS pricing, that is applicable here. So you do have to know those general categories. Here's the catch though. Um, the most expensive pricing for EC2, starting from most expensive to least expensive, goes in order. Dedicated host is the most expensive you can pay because you're actually asking AWS for a physical machine. Like you're asking, I want this host to be mine and mine alone. So there's no shared tenancy, so you pay maximum price. So that's dedicated host. Then there's on-demand pricing, which oddly enough, most people use and is the most expensive version next to dedicated host, which most people don't use, frankly. But on demand, where you just drop a credit card and you request a machine, that's the most expensive AWS pricing. Um, the reserved instances, of which they come into a couple of different flavors, that's the third, and probably like the second cheapest. And that particular type has two flavors where you have standard convertible, and I'm not necessarily going to go into that. But that basically says I want to get into a contract with AWS. You don't really sign anything, but you agree to pay AWS for a period of time. And so reserved instances are those 1 to 3 year contracts that you get for AWS. And then spot instances, spot I always say is the eBay of reserved EC2 pricing, because you basically bid on the extra capacity that AWS has. Now, here's some keywords that are catchy that say, like, show that this is clearly a spot instance answer. One, anything using unused EC2 capacity, that's only spot. Spot is the only purchase type for EC2 that uses unused capacity. 90% discount, spot instances are the cheapest instances that you can get, and they're the only ones that go up to 90%. Reserve instances will go anywhere from about 20 to 75%, depending on what you need. But spot instances are the only ones that will give you, like, if you're really good at it, up to a 90% discount. They're the only ones that can achieve that. On-demand instances, which is the third, most expensive, and the dedicated hosts, there's no discount for those. Matter of fact, dedicated hosts are more expensive than standard pricing. And if you scroll down a little bit, Greg, if you don't mind, what you'll see is it will go through in detail all of the answers, and talk about which workloads are good for that and which ones aren't. So if you keep scrolling down and go all the way to more towards the bottom where the links are, you'll see that it'll tell you why the other answers are incorrect, right? And it even has cheat sheets that go back to the EC2 pricing and what EC2 spot is. But John, for Tutorials Dojo, which is his website, he has a link that you can click on. And by the way, if you ever click on his links, make sure you open them in a new window. Don't just click on the link in place, because it replaces your test browser. Just open it up in a new window. But what it will do is it'll give you a cheat sheet so you can see this a little differently. Does that help? So 4 types. Greg, I think you're muted again, just to say this.
I muted myself. That's all.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Just making sure.
I'm
Yeah.
following your direction in terms of scrolling through.
Okay. Let's see. Do you mind if I request keyboard and mouse control just to take that burden off you?
Go right ahead.
All right. Did that work? Let's try it again. Well, it looks like it worked, but then nothing happened. It just lagged out. Interesting. All right, scroll down if you don't mind to question 3. Sorry, the keyboard and mouse thing didn't work at all.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I can take control. Hold on 1 second. Nope, still not working. Sorry, go to meeting, having problems. You go right ahead. Scroll down just a little bit for me to the top of question 3.
All right. I have all these. Sorry. It opened up a whole bunch of new windows, which is
Sorry about that.
messing things up. Okay. How do I get back to the showing the test?
Well, I'm seeing it now, actually.
Okay.
So we can see your screen.
There we go. There we go. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, just scroll down a little bit and we can see it. By the way, the birds in the background are lovely.
Yeah, but I'm going to go inside because it's probably too loud.
No, it's good. It's totally good. It's kind of soothing, actually.
Can you see my next question?
I can. It hasn't scrolled up, but I'm assuming it's not at the top of the page.
I'm showing that I'm question number 3 incorrect, but it sounds like you're not seeing it on your screen.
We're seeing question 3. I was wondering if you could scroll up a little bit so it was at the top
Oh,
of the page.
scroll up. I'm sorry. I thought you wanted to look at this one.
Yeah, no, scroll up just a little bit so I can see it. Because right now it's kind of in the middle of the page for us.
Okay. Is that any better?
I don't know if for anybody else it updated, but it didn't update on my screen.
So you're not seeing which of the following allows you to categorize and track your AWS costs on a detailed level?
Yeah, could you scroll to the next question just to make sure I'm seeing scrolls correctly?
Yeah. So I'm up to question number 4.
Huh. Yeah, it's not updating for some reason. All right. Well, since GoToMeeting's having problems for whatever reason, if it's okay, I'm going to pivot here for just a second to make sure. Yeah. All right. Greg, I really appreciate you making that attempt, but for some reason the technology is not cooperating tonight. So let's switch here for a second. All right. So I'm going to pivot here, and unfortunately we're not going to review your questions, but if we see a question that you know you got wrong, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go through a series of questions. All right. Go through skipped. Here we go. All right. So question number 2 here. So we'll go ahead and pop in, and we want to be efficient with time. So which AWS well-architected pillar stresses the importance of selecting the most appropriate and right number of resources types for your requirements? So you may remember that there were 5 pillars, right? There was operational excellence, performance efficiency, cost optimization, reliability, and security, correct? So you may remember that there were 5 pillars. So this does require at least a surface knowledge, because you won't be required to know this unless you decide to go after architecting. But there are 5 pillars. So which one would basically be about making sure that you're right sizing your components? Do you have the right number? Are they appropriate for what you're doing, right? And that would be cost optimization. I think performance efficiency could also apply here, but performance efficiency is really about squeezing the most out of the resources that you have. It's not about selecting necessarily the appropriately sized and right number of resources, right? There can be some bleed over there. And so if you scroll down here and look at what John has, right, he talks because performance efficiency is about using the resources that you do choose efficiently. This is about choosing them to begin with, right? So basically focuses on avoiding unneeded costs and including understanding controlling where money is being spent. There are links there, which I also have in the sheet for today, about understanding the well-architected framework. If you decide to look at this white paper, just know that it's dense. I probably would recommend that you would look at the web or URL first. Don't read the white paper unless you really are into that kind of thing, or if you're really not getting it for whatever reason. Okay, so question number 3 is that what is the right arrangement of global infrastructure components according to geographical coverage area size in descending order? So basically from biggest to smallest, which is a question that we had in last session when we covered this. And so the biggest geographical unit that you can like assign resources to, well, the biggest is really globally, because there's a couple of global services like IAM, by the way, is users. That's a global service, but that's virtual. That doesn't have a corresponding physical footprint. So regions have a physical footprint, and inside the regions, you've got clusters of data centers called availability zones, and then you have tiny little edge locations. Those together, our powers combined make AWS Planet. No, I'm just kidding. But like it makes up AWS. So from biggest to smallest, it's regions, AZs, then edge locations. So good. All right. Here's a great little map, by the way, of like region, like being associated with a city, then clusters of data centers being the availability zones, and then we've got these points of presence. Points of presence is synonymous with edge locations, right? Points of presence is an old term from like the 80s. So, all right. All right, so which AWS storage service offers fast read and writes performance and provides temporary block level storage for your instances? By the way, sometimes this word will be ephemeral, which also means temporary, right? And the only temporary storage that exists inside of AWS, and it's also super fast, is instant storage. It's not an EBS storage type, so there's 4 EBS storage types. This is not one of them, right? This is a whole different class of storage that AWS recommends that you don't use for the most part, unless you really have a high need for high IO throughput, and you don't mind losing your data if the system crashes. Which I don't know, a lot of us, we don't like it when we lose data when our systems crash, but you can design for that so that you can like leverage the speed of these ephemeral instances. What's interesting though is that these instant storage is actually on the host computer that your virtual machine is running on, which is super cool, right? It's super cool that like instance A, B, and C, like these are virtual machines, they're sitting on hosts, and you can actually attach these virtual machines to physical storage on the physical host. And that's what instant storage is. So since it's all SSD backed, because I'm sure that I don't think any of us are using mechanical drives now. At least I hope you're not. I really hope that your life has gotten so good that none of you on your laptops are actually still using mechanical drives, because once you use SSD, you never go back. You can never go back to using mechanical drives after you used a solid state drive. So same thing here. It's not that the other systems are mechanical versus solid state, but this is directly attached to the virtual machine, so it's super fast. And that makes a huge difference. Let's see. All the other options are obviously wrong because EBS is not really the answer, because that's permanent storage, and EFS is permanent storage as well. So that's why that's happening. All right. Just making sure that the GoToMeeting technology is still functioning. All right. All right, which of the following is not part of the AWS global infrastructure? So basically, which one of these has nothing to do with the basically physical data center footprint? Well, regions, availability zones, and edge locations, which we just went over, we said were the basic fundamental building blocks that built AWS's physical infrastructure. Placement groups, oddly enough, are used for high performance computing and they're virtual constructs. So there's nothing really there that has to do with AWS's global infrastructure. So there's only these three components: regions, availability zones, and then edge locations. Okay, question number 6. Where is the best place to archive logs and other infrequently accessed files for a long time with no strict retrieval time? So you need to archive logs and other infrequently accessed files. So we already know that we can, like, there's just files. Infrequently accessed. So infrequently accessed might have you thinking, by the way, what if we did Amazon S3 infrequent access? But then it was like, oh, but for a long time with no strict retrieval times. Because I will say this question's a little vague because it's like, what is the best place? Is it the cheapest? Is it the fastest? Is it the most reliable? Is it the most redundant, right? What is the cheapest place? Or I'm sorry, what is the best place? So, you know, if you want to archive log files, obviously cheaper is always better because that's one of the 5 pillars, right? It's cost optimizations. And you could use infrequent access. You could. But the cheapest option, especially if you have no strict retrieval time, because if you can, for just to say this, is that if everyone can type in a chat, how long does it take for a request to begin processing if you use Glacier, just the standard Glacier request? How long does it take? Does anyone remember? Not the expedited request, not the bulk request. How long does it take for the request to even start processing for standard Glacier if you want to like retrieve an archive? So the standard actually is 3 to 5 hours, which you can actually pay a small, it's like 50 cents or something for an expedite fee. It's really cheap. And you can get that started in a couple minutes, right? But it's 3 to 5 hours. So it's not horrible. 3 to 5 hours isn't bad. If an auditor shows up and says, hey, I need that log file from 2 years ago, and you're like, okay, give me 6 hours or 7 hours, or I'll get it to you tomorrow, that's doable, right? You can do that. Because by the way, Glacier restores over to S3. And so since you can start something in 3 to 5 hours, you just kick it off. And then once it starts and processes, it just shows up in S3. Then you can share it with the auditor and say, here you go, right? You're done. But standard Glacier restores start after about 3 to 5 hours after request. That's standard. If you want to expedite that, like I said, you can. So Glacier is actually the best answer because it's the cheapest and it meets all the requirements. And that's really key, is that you got to make sure you know what the requirements are. Remember, we want to identify the service and what the requirements are for the service. So by the way, here are the retrieval types. Expedited retrieval will return in 1 to 5 minutes. Standard retrieval will return in 3 to 5 hours, and bulk retrievals will return within 5 to 12 hours. But that's if you want more than one file, by the way. Amazon loves that because you're being efficient. So appreciate the guesses. So the rest of the answers don't fit. All right, question number 7. Your local servers are in need of an upgrade to serve your consumers better. However, locally stored data cannot be migrated due to compliance requirements. So you've got some security requirements that say, you know what, you can't migrate local data. So then what should you adopt for this scenario? So there's a couple of different options here. One, you could slowly migrate your web servers and data into AWS while keeping your budget in check. You could dispose of all your servers and migrate your cloud to AWS, since it will be cheaper and more durable to store data in the cloud. Don't perform any migration, just save some capital for a large-scale migration in the future. Remember, Amazon's going to want you to actually use their service. So, just to say that. You could utilize AWS web servers, but keep the data local. So set up a hybrid model in which the web service in AWS will communicate with your local data store. So what does that mean? So for example, let's say that it's WordPress, and WordPress obviously stores in MySQL. That's the backend database. So WordPress is up front, and you want WordPress to talk to MySQL. You could have your web servers up in AWS and then have a fast, dedicated connection so you could store your data inside of MySQL on your local data center. That's kind of a bad example, honestly, because I don't think anyone would ever do that. But that is the answer, is that what if you kept your local data store, in your on-premise data center and kept your front-end web and application servers up front, right? You could still cache data up there, by the way, but the caches would bust on a regular basis. So number one's the answer. I gotta tell you, I would probably only get this right because the other answers don't make any sense. Because I would tell you that I probably wouldn't necessarily agree with that. So sometimes the process of elimination helps you, right? Because you know that's the only sane answer. It's probably the one that AWS wants, but the other ones don't make any sense. Because remember, it's about how AWS sees their services. That's what you're taking a test for, right? So, yeah. So they're basically saying set up a hybrid environment for your EC2 servers. That one's a little iffy. All right, question number 8. You have a customized EC2 instance running your latest web application. How can you create an exact copy of this instance in another region, right? What does AMI stand for, by the way? Does anyone remember? Type that in the chat if you do. Amazon Machine Image, that's exactly correct. Good job. Yes. Good. Yeah, so AMI stands for Amazon Machine Image, and all it is a bootable virtual disk with an operating system on it. That's all it is. Now it's one that either you've made or that Ubuntu or Red Hat or Microsoft has made. Because remember, you can only boot into Linux or Windows really on AWS. So, but know that all the vendors have their stuff out there. And don't get me wrong, I said you can only boot into Windows and Linux. You can go to the marketplace, by the way, and buy F5, Cisco. You can get all kinds of crazy virtual devices. But standard, when we launch EC2 instances, it's going to be Windows or Linux. So the vendor's going to make AMIs. They're going to publish those AMIs with official vendor fingerprints, but you can also make copies of those AMIs and put them into your account. And those AMIs, basically, again, are just bootable disk images, right? So the funny thing about AMIs is that when you have a running EC2 instance inside of an availability zone, the disks that are attached to those instances, they only sit in the availability zone. They don't sit at the region level. But if you make a snapshot or a copy of a boot disk, it virtually copies up to the region level, and then you can copy things from region to region, right? And so there's APIs and tools to do that. So in this case, what you'll do is it's standard practice. So please put this in your brains that when AWS asks you, hey, do you want to copy from one region to the next? The answer is you're going to basically make a copy or a clone of the instance, and you're going to take, and when you snapshot it up, when you make a copy of the boot disk, you put it at the region level, and then from there you can actually use an API to copy it from one region to the next region. But without doing that AMI building process, without doing like a snapshot, you copy it straight from one availability zone in a region to another availability zone in a region. If you make an AMI of it, it's really easy to copy at that point in time. And copy, clone, image, mirror, right? Those are all common words for that. So create backups of all your EBS volumes and copy them to another region. That's technically accurate, but you need to copy it to an AMI and then copy it over from that point in time, right? So think of an AMI as a different classification of backup that makes it a special shareable image just for Amazon. So, all right, a couple answers there. How do you do copy AMI per region? Oh, I like that. There's a premium support knowledge base. Interesting. All right. Question number 9. What AWS service can monitor the compliance status of your AWS resources against basically a known set of compliance guidelines? So in other words, you need a resource that's going to tell you when things have changed from what they should be. So when you have there's one set of rules here, you start here and you want to know when things drift or get away, like when someone's changed some kind of resource inside your AWS account. Well, that's called AWS config. That's what it's totally there for. AWS config snapshots the settings in your AWS account on certain resources, and if someone changes them, it tells you that they've changed. So you can see what's drifted or what's different. And so that's perfect for compliance because it basically will tell you the compliance status of your resources against known standards. IAM is for users, as you probably know. Artifact is for artifacts like security compliance documentation. Artifact is such a weird service. I don't even know why they made it, quite frankly, because all it is a collection of PDF files of their compliances. They could have just put that on a website, but everybody's account has Artifact in it, and it's got PDF files of all the awesome security certifications that AWS has. They're attestations, actually. Weird. CloudWatch is a metrics repository for performance metrics like CPU, memory, disk, network, that kind of thing. So CloudWatch can't be used for compliance. So config, even by process of elimination, config is actually still the only answer. But config is actually used to check configurations. It's funny, AWS config doesn't actually configure things, it's used to check configurations. So there are other processes like System Manager, which actually manage systems like the configuration and whatnot, or OpsWorks, which does configuration management for EC2 instances. But AWS config is a little misnamed because all it does is track configurations. So I know. If I was naming it, I would call it something intuitive, like the AWS configuration tracking service. But I'm not in charge. All right. Question number 10. Which AWS service allows me to patch my Windows EC2 instances without having to RDP into them, right? So I actually just mentioned this, right? That there is a service that's actually used to patch, configure, manipulate EC2 instances, right? And it's called the Systems Manager, right? And Systems Manager has a bunch of subservices like the Patch Manager or the Parameter Store or of all these other like cool little subservices. But Systems Manager actually does what it's named for, is that Systems Manager manages systems. So again, with the naming, this one's like intuitive. Code deploy actually is also intuitive. It deploys code. CloudFormation is kind of intuitive in that it forms clouds, such as you use it for infrastructure as code. So you may have seen that actually when we went through your class, because CloudFormation is used for infrastructure as code provisioning. The simple workflow service is to create workflows where you need to track state on each change in the workflow. Like, for example, ordering something. Like, you can imagine all the processes that Amazon has to go through when you order something. It's like, is the person paid? Do we have their email address? Do we have the thing on hand? Is it boxed? What is the closest distribution center to the client? It's like there's steps that have to be followed. So the simple workflow service is for anything that requires a step-by-step process. Any questions about any of that before we go forward? All right. Absolutely. Chris, I will make sure that we make sure the email is included, so I'll make sure you get it. We may email directly just to make sure we bypass some spam filters, so we'll make sure that all happens. All right, so which of the following do you need to programmatically interact with your AWS environment? So programmatically means through code. So if you're going to interact programmatically, you basically need a software development kit because you need to be able to manipulate through code, and so you don't want to have to write all that stuff yourself. So if you bring a software development kit, it will actually bring extra functions or services to your code so that you can make those calls out to Amazon. So that's programmatic. SDKs are required for programmatic access. And then in order for your application outside of AWS to interact with AWS, you need some way to identify yourself and specify your level of access, like almost like a username and password. But programmatically, we call those access keys. It's access and secret keys, basically, right? When you get an access key, there's two components. There's the kind of access identifier, kind of like your account identifier, like who you are. And then there's the password, which is called the secret key. And so Lambda is serverless function, so that wouldn't be used for, access for programmatic. Username and password wouldn't be used because, quite frankly, it wouldn't work. Username and password only works when you log into the console, which of course is the first option, which is the management console, which you can only do if you actually use a username and password. So those aren't the answers. It's really, you need a software development kit to programmatically access AWS, and you need access keys. Access and secret keys is sometimes how it's talked about. All right. Let's see. Question number 12. You have a mission critical server that is currently down in AWS, and you need to bring it back up within 15 minutes for service continuity. Which of the following support plans will allow you to contact technical support to immediately resolve the issue? So first of all, you may remember from our discussions before is that basic gives you nothing. Developer gives you like a 12-hour response time, if I remember correctly. Business gives you, I want to say it's like a 4-hour response time. And then enterprise gives you a 15-minute response time. So there's really only, like, they kind of like softballed this one up if you know the times, which I might have gotten that wrong, but I think it's pretty accurate. Let's see. Business is 1 hour. Production system impaired. Production system down. Business is 1 hour. Developer is 12 hours. Enterprise is, if it's a business critical system, is about 15 minutes, right? So you got to know that, like, these, at least these top levels. The rest of this general guidance and all that, don't worry about that. The only question they ever ask is this top level question, right? So memorize that enterprise is 15 minutes response time, business is an hour response time, developer is a 12-hour response time. By the way, they've got, like, you got to look at the caveats because they got some caveats there. And then of course, if you're on basic, you're out of luck. There's no support for basic. Developer, by the way, I just looked up recently. I thought it was $50 a month. They changed it to $29 a month, or 3% of your spend. So that's a big change because it used to be $50 a month and there was no percentage of spend. But if you spend $3,000 a month with Amazon, you're going to spend $30 for developer support, which is the lowest tier of active support that you can get. Business and enterprise, by the way, also are percentages spend like 5% and 7% respectively, if I remember correctly. So just know that you may think that's a lot, but I got to tell you, especially at the enterprise level, the support is awesome. But remember this: 15 minutes for enterprise, an hour for business, 12 hours for developer. By the way, I have a link to the support plans also in the links that I have for you for the Google Docs this week. So just, be aware that that's the case, because this pricing comes up a lot on the test. Pricing comes up a lot. The superficials of the well-architected framework comes up a lot, and the EC2 instance reservation types, like those things, come up a lot as well. All right, question number 13. Due to a high number of visitors, many customers are timing out from your website, which is running in an auto-scaling group of EC2 instances behind an elastic load balancer. So by the way, you got to know the acronyms. So the ELB, right? You got to remember that. It's a load balancer. Upon checking, the auto-scaling group has stopped adding new instances to the auto-scaling group. Which of the following trusted advisor categories will give you more insight on this issue? So if you're not seeing the auto-scaling group add more instances, then either you've hit a limit for the number of instances that you have, or you don't need it from a performance perspective. Like the instances aren't overloaded, so auto-scaling hasn't added more instances. So that would be service limits and performance just straight off the bat. But it wouldn't necessarily be fault tolerance because you don't have to worry about redundancy because you have probably at least 2 instances in an auto-scaling group. Security doesn't really apply, and cost optimization doesn't really apply. Although I'm not saying the trusted advisor wouldn't have recommendations, but service limits and performance match this particular problem because there's really only two reasons that an auto-scaling group stops adding instances, is because it either can't or it doesn't need to. Because remember, the auto-scaling group's job is to make sure that things are matching load. So it's making sure that the performance of the EC2 instances matches the load of what's coming in. And so it either can't add more instances, it can't get bigger, or it doesn't need to get bigger, which is why it's not doing it. So Trusted Advisor, by the way, is only available to people with above a basic support plan. So something to keep in mind. There are economics here and some Trusted Advisor stuff. I think John's cheat sheet for this is really good, so I recommend reading that instead. Okay, question number 14. Which among the following is the most cost-effective and scalable? So that now we're at basically cheapest, or like cost-effective, not said cheapest, and then scalable for object storage. Object storage. So the minute they said object storage, you know which service they're talking about, right? It says it right there. It's S3, right? They're talking about S3. Nothing else does object storage. EBS is block storage. EFS is network storage, and storage gateway is a whole different thing entirely, but basically that's file storage. So S3 is the object store inside of AWS. There is no other. So now you know. And so in this case, if they had put like S3 infrequent access or S3 Glacier or S3 standard, then you start getting into weirdness, because it's like, okay, which of these is the most scalable and cost effective? Well, of course, Glacier is the most cost effective, and standard S3 is the most scalable. But in this case, they took all that away from you and they just said, hey, you know what? We're only going to put one object store here, so easy peasy, right? Now you know. All right. Question number 15. Which service offers volume discounts when you enable consolidated billing? Now, this is like a high level cloud practitioner question. Because, I mean, just to say this, none of these other services, by the way, have a dimension of volume for pricing. Don't get me wrong, CloudFront, when you do a number of requests, you get charged for the number of requests that hit CloudFront. Essence is the same, you get charged for every request that hits. CloudTrail, same thing. But S3 is the only core service out of these like ones listed that the more you use, the cheaper it is per unit. So for example, the first 100 gigs is 10 cents, the next 50 gigs is 9 cents, the next 40 gigs is 8 cents. Like, to give you an example of like the kind of tiering that could be done. Don't quote those numbers, by the way, they're completely inaccurate. But like, here's an example. So what happens is that if Bob has an account and Susan has an account, when you turn on consolidated billing, it combines the usage. So instead of paying for 4 terabytes, which is the highest price, or 8 terabytes, which is the highest price, what happens is that you cross the 10 terabyte threshold because it combines the storage space. And so now 10 terabytes of that storage is at, I can't remember, like 17 cents a terabyte or something like that. And then 2 terabytes is at 13 cents a terabyte. Whereas before, both of them would have been paying 17 cents a terabyte, or sorry, $17 a terabyte, not 17 cents, $17 a terabyte, right? Versus $13 a terabyte. So by combining them, what happens is you then get volume pricing, because the more you use, the cheaper each unit of that pricing is, especially at the top. So, and the others aren't really supported in a consolidated billing. The only way, by the way, you would know that is if you were to look at pricing under AWS. So John, again, has a cheat sheet here. Totally recommend that you look at it. Very useful. All right. We'll probably do one or two more and then we'll wrap it up. Question number 16. Which of the following services are not considered to be region specific? So I mentioned this before, is that while there are only physical, the only physical data center footprint that AWS has is region, AZ, and then points of presence. I did mention that services from a virtual standpoint can be considered global, right? Like they globally control your entire account, no matter what region you're in. Well, IAM is definitely one, right? But it's not even listed here. IAM is usernames and passwords, right? So there's the IAM, when you create a user in IAM, let's say Michael Forrester, that user has permissions across the entire account if you've granted them permissions across the entire account. Don't get me wrong, you can limit permissions in a very granular fashion in IAM. But another one that does that that's also global is Route 53, because Route 53, what is Route 53? Like, what is that? If you were to take that outside of AWS, what is Route 53 as a service? Does anyone remember what it provides? That's right, DNS. And it does, obviously, Troy, it does do DNS routing as well. You're absolutely right, right? So DNS, we use DNS every day. We type in www.cnn.com or wherever gmail.com, and that's domain name resolution. That's the domain name system. So Route 53 is just Amazon's version of that. So that's got to be a global service. You can't just isolate that regionally, right? And then the web application firewall is another global service because it has to basically run firewall rules across, like those rules definitions have to run across the entire world. So when you pull in a WAF, right, it does it like globally for everywhere, for any point in the region. CloudTrail is localized to your region. VPCs cannot span regions, so those are localized to regions. And Lambda has to actually run in a region as well. And actually, most of the time, we associate it with an availability zone. So those other three services actually can't run globally. They actually have to be assigned to a region or to an availability zone. So Route 53 and the Web Application Firewall are the only global services here that are listed, but IAM is one, for example. That's another one. So there's only a handful of services. So we have STS, Route 53, CloudFront, WAF, and IAM, and the Global Acceleration Service. Global Accelerator is a new one that's come out. So remember, memorize those 5 or 6 services that are like global. And by the way, this is memorization. Some people have like, do we have to memorize? Yes, we do have to memorize. It's essential, right? It's a trivia exam. You gotta memorize it. All right, so those were our 16 questions that we got through. It's now 8:28. I want to just make sure we're gonna check on the emails. So we're gonna send you some emails tomorrow to make sure everything's kosher. If some of you have been missing emails, please check your spam folder because I have been sending messages, and I apologize if you haven't gotten them. It is worth noting also that the videos for these are up. So, and they've been up for a minute. So let's see here. Let me just send this link out really quick and post this out to everybody. Good, so there's a YouTube, this is a playlist. So the 3rd video will actually be up by end of day tomorrow. So I have been posting the videos out there. Your homework for this week is to stay focused on mastering your tests. Stay focused, this right here. Just one test at a time, get a 95% moving on. And then, by the way, if you finish all of the tests, then what I want you to do is to take 1, 2, 3, and 4 all in sequence and see if you can maintain that 95 across all of them. You want to really have these concepts, even, and I by the way, I know some of you are like, I think we're memorizing the answers. You might be, and guess what? That's fine. That's totally fine. What we're doing here is we're trying to get the knowledge instilled in you. And if you memorizing the answers gets that to you, that's awesome, right? Because by the way, like I said, it's not going to be a 100% match to the test. But now if I say to you, hey, by the way, which service uses users, groups, and roles, and you've memorized that for a question, you're like, oh, that's IAM because I memorized that for the question. So it's like instilling the knowledge in you. Don't worry, it'll get a lot more hands-on if you decide to pursue an associate's exam. But that's your homework. So the homework is to keep working the exams. So next week, I'm going to rope people in, see if I can get some other people to volunteer. We'll go through some other questions, other setups, and we'll talk about the 5th session, which Greg sent an email out. So if you haven't gotten that, we'll fix that as well. But we'll make sure that you're on the list. And that's our session today. That's session 3. Does anyone have any questions for me? Any confusion? You're not clear about what you're doing next week? You're just going to keep going. All right, everyone. I can't leave without a little squeeze, so we'll see you guys for session 4. That'll be a week next Monday. I will send out emails. We will figure out the email thing. We'll make sure everyone gets it. So if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. michael.forrester@webbasedsolutions.com. Got my contact information. So we will catch up with you next week. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you being here. I'm going to stop talking, but we're officially done. If anyone has any lingering questions or anything they need to talk to me about, please just let me know.